Today's edition of the SpyTrack podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. Visit bettoredge.com right now. Use code SpyTrack at registration. Get yourself $20 on the house and start gambling. The final four of the NFL postseason is here. Basketball is in big swing with big MLK Day today. Plenty to get to, plenty to bet on, plenty to gamble. Do it safely, quickly, fast, and at the biggest social betting marketplace on the internet at bettoredge.com right now. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, January 19th. It's a big NFL show. We're going to break down some of these divisional losses and the off seasons to come for Houston, Buffalo, San Francisco, and Chicago in dramatic fashion, including a 12th hour coaching vacancy now in Buffalo with former head coach Sean McDermott out the door, leaving Josh Allen's coaching position wide open as we head into the middle of January and pushing towards a big offseason for plenty of these teams, but most notably the Bears, the Bills, and a couple of these other fringe contenders now in a bit of disarray heading into January. That's next with Dan Soemann. All right, Dan, 4 teams to get through. We'll try to fly through as much as possible because all this info is now live on SpyTrack.com in article format. We've got, I think it's 28 teams in the books now in terms of offseason previews. We've got the final 4 remaining. We're going to start with Houston today. Easily I guess San Francisco's up there for most devastating losses of the weekend, but just felt like Houston had nothing to give. And unfortunately, that starts with the quarterback position. Before we dive into some of the numbers and some of the thoughts and some of the names surrounding this offseason for Houston, it does seem like a lot of these conversations are going to begin with CJ Stroud, who, look, we let him off the hook last year because of the sophomore slump stuff. Everybody goes through that. We're going to see Drake May go through that with a harder schedule next year, with more tape on him, with more things figured out. It was a better season for CJ Stroud, especially from the regular season standpoint. There were moments, especially with Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz, where the offense popped a little bit, Dan. But at the end of the day, and certainly through the postseason, we're going to have a bad taste in our mouth with CJ Stroud. So where do we sit heading into 2026 with that player specifically, knowing there's a 5th-year option of about $40 million hanging in the balance, and I guess some thoughts of some sort of contract extension as well?
Yeah, I am not sure where this ultimately goes. It does seem, I mean, the early sounds are that they're going to pick it up, right? They have Davis Mills signed, guaranteed again next year. So you kind of just run it back with those two, I would assume, before moving on in 2027, I would think. So,
I mean, do you have a problem with the $40 million option then? Do you think there's a world where they don't exercise that? Because I'm of the mindset that you keep them under 2 for 46 because there's obviously value there. But are you concerned that the $40 million guarantee is not worthy right now?
Well, there probably is a lot of concern about that, but I mean, I'm not sure it's enough to move on. I mean, quarterbacks get paid a lot of money. The $40 million doesn't necessarily scare me if you think there's any inkling that you want to see more from him going forward. So
let me ask you this, because I mentioned it in the piece. You're going to hear it quite a bit here. Is there a quarterback competition in 2026? Have you gotten to that level with CJ Stroud, or do you think it's his job for one more year and then we'll see what we have?
I mean, between him and Davis Mills, I think you're still going to go with CJ Stroud personally.
Are they drafting? Are they adding? What are your thoughts there?
That's what I don't know. If they're, I assume you don't want to bring in a third guy next year if both of those
Mills seem capable. I do think the competition would be between those two players, and there were some calls for that even during the playoffs here with CJ playing really, really tough football, really inefficient football. But I'm with you. That's the contracted quarterbacks for 2026. It probably remains that way. There is some question about this option, and we've seen teams kind of go in both directions because it does become fully guaranteed the second you exercise it. I tend to lean on the side that he's going to be worthy of 2 for 46 over the next 2 seasons, even if it doesn't go their way. He's probably their best overall option for the next 2 seasons, and you've invested a lot around him to the point of where if you're starting to give up and give into some of the cracks you're seeing, then what does that mean for the rest of the roster that you've done a lot of damage to? And by the way, I've got like 6 extension candidates on this Houston team we can talk about in a second here. So there's a lot riding on what we're talking about right now, and it's clearly the decision that has to get made first in this Houston front office before some of these other dominoes begin to fall, right? So let's get to it. Let's just assume. I mean, I guess we don't necessarily have to assume they exercise the $40 million. Let's just assume he's the assumed guaranteed 2026 starting quarterback and nothing more. Okay, we don't have to put too much pressure on the option salary at this point in time, but you're still obviously extending Will Anderson Jr., right? That is the biggest no-brainer we have in football this offseason, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Yeah, that's the next $40 million plus non-quarterback. That's the guy you're going to lock him in for as long as he'll let you lock him in for, which is probably 3 to 4 years max. He's got the 4th year plus the 5th year option that you'll exercise before you do that contract. And you're talking upwards of Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons type money for this guy who has just blossomed into exactly what you hoped he'd be. So that one's a no-brainer in all regards, including, in my opinion, the long-term extension. Let's get into some of the other extension candidates, because I really do spend some time on these pieces, Dan, to pull out as many names as humanly possible, whether it's positive or negative. And I couldn't believe how many contracted year players, right? So players entering the final year of their current contract in 2026 were worthy of at least a discussion for a new contract extension on this team. Right tackle Titus Howard, who, man, when he missed some time this postseason, the entire offensive line fell apart, which is super rare for a right side player to have that kind of impact, but it did. And he has not been the most consistently great player for the Houston Texans since 2019, but he may be the most reliable. And in that regard, if you've got an issue at QB1, you're not going to screw with your offensive line right now. So I expect some sort of tack on extension for Howard, because they don't have depth at this position right now. They have done a ton of work. Remember this time last year when we talked about the Houston situation and how CJ Stroud had fallen back down to earth and how aggressive were they going to be? And then they started trading offensive linemen left and right for the next 3 months. They traded Tunzel. They traded all sorts of players. Kenyon Green, they gave up on quickly. And they tried to add in veterans. They tried to add in multiple draft picks at basically every position. And they still don't have the interior of that line figured out. But Howard's a win right now. He's enough of a positive to keep around. So I think that's an easy one. What about Danielle Hunter, who, we talk about these guys that hit 30, 31, 32, the Hendricksons of the world, all these other guys that fall off a cliff. TJ Watt, we talked about last week in Pittsburgh, who, the injuries are there. There's some fall off stuff evident. And Danielle Hunter just keeps throwing out 15 sacks a year. You just keep believing until he stops doing it, right? And that becomes more money for them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree there.
Or is there a world where, because you're about to hand out $45 million to Will Anderson Jr., that Hunter situation becomes suspect, and you don't want to have bookend $40 million players? Because look, you're paying Hunter 36 and change right now. You're going to add probably a year or two at that cost because of what he's doing for you. And there's a lot of smart people out there, smarter than us, Dan, that are going to say that he's doing what he's doing because Will Anderson Jr. exists on the other side. And to that, I say, great, but he's still manufacturing the production, right? He's still getting the job done. What is that worth to you? You're not paying your quarterback. You know what I mean? You're not extending CJ Stroud right now. There's not going to be a signing bonus balloon payment coming to CJ Stroud. Spend that money on the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion. So I think he's a benefactor of everything that's happening with this roster currently. I'd say the same for Al-Shaair, who came over from San Francisco because he got bounced off for financial purposes. He had a really strong year in the center of that Houston defense. I'm not messing with that side of the ball too much. If these guys need contracts for 2-3 year extensions, we're doing it. And we're living with it, even if the Stroud stuff falls apart, because now you've at least got one side of the ball to rely on, and you can patchwork some stuff together, whether it's with a young quarterback, maybe it's with a Baker Mayfield who falls off of Tampa Bay after 2026, something to that effect. You sort of react to the offensive side of the ball versus going all in, because you've got this stalwart defense to rely on and a defensive-minded head coach to go with it. So all the guys I've got here defensively, Dan, seem like easy no-brainers, even if they're not necessarily what most teams would be doing in the interim, right? Paying an off-ball linebacker, paying a 36-year-old edge defender. But in Houston's case, I think you do it. Let's move down to the bubble candidates. Joe Mixon's career might be over, right? I mean, you just got to move on from this thing and move forward, even though you're hurting at that position right now.
Yeah, I'd agree. No, I mean, we didn't see him the entire year. Who
No.
knows what comes ahead? And I mean, we know our running backs are accessible, whether in free agency or you can,
Knowing what
maximize
we
that.
know, yeah, let me build on that point because it's a good one to dive into here. Knowing what we know about the Stroud stuff now, I mean, they're gonna let Christian Kirk walk. I can't imagine they'd pay him anything significant. Tank Dell's a bubble candidate. You just got to give up on the injury stuff with him at this point in time. So you're really rolling with Nico Collins, a couple of mid-round draft picks that are, doing their job in the very, very, very basement of your depth chart. You've got a Dalton Schultz, Brevin Jordan situation. As long as everybody's healthy, that's working. And I think you actually tack on a year or two to Dalton Schultz to keep him around as a blanket for CJ Stroud here. But knowing what we know about this passing game, which is going backwards, not forwards right now, despite Nico Collins being an all-pro, do you go out and get a bona fide free agent running back right now, Dan, to go along with Woody Marks, who showed some really nice signs? Is this a Breece Hall candidacy? Is this a Javonte Williams candidacy for you because of what we know about the passing game?
I would assume so. I mean, however they do it, I think Troy Aikman was pretty critical on the broadcast at the end of the game, saying like this entire offseason needs to be dedicated to trying to recapture whatever made CJ Stroud successful in his rookie year. And that's why I think I'm willing to get into the 5th-year option still, because we did see it. So we know that there is potential there unless he's totally just fallen off a cliff and been figured out. I think they have a championship caliber defense. We saw that yesterday. That's the only reason they were even in that game towards the end. If they can use whatever draft assets they had towards adding a running back, wide receiver, tight ends, however you want to split that, and then supplement that in free agency, whether that is running backs, like we said, just signing a premier guy to make Woody Marks more of like a 1B. In his usage was a little bit weird. His usage was a little bit weird too. He was most successful in college as a pass catcher, and all of a sudden he is just totally eliminated from that, that part of the game plan. So I think there's some small changes in terms of roster construction, maybe plus coordinator at that. I know they already changed last year, their offensive coordinator, but there has to be changes on the offensive side of the ball. As you laid out, they can pretty much just bring back their defensive pieces and focus on offense.
Yeah, and I wonder if a lot of that isn't what we're talking about here, where they came into 2026 thinking they were going to resuscitate CJ Stroud as a top flight passer in this league. And he went up and threw basically 220 a game. You know what I mean? Which just isn't enough to hold up right now in this high scoring league. So I do wonder if the mindset will shift to, we got to slow things down. We got to get a little bit more underneath, and we got to focus on a running game and a ground and pound system that could use Marks out of the backfield, but then you better go find somebody to go down between the tackles, right? So they do have 2 second-round picks. They do have 2 fourth-round picks coming right now in the draft. That could be what we're talking about here. That could also be a quarterback. Let's be perfectly frank. That's where these kind of teams, these fringe, contender teams, go and start to replenish the pot, because they're not drafting top 10. They're not in on these top guys. But if somebody slips into the second round and Houston has two picks sitting there, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked, because the draft is going to be before the May 1st deadline to exercise that 5th-year option on CJ Stroud. Let me put that out there to the universe. So you can make decision 1 before you've made decision 2. Let's put it that way. I'd expect this there to be a running back situation at some degree for this Houston team, knowing that Mixon is there. You're going to let Nick Chubb walk away to whatever whatever his career looks like going forward, even though he did give them some pretty good attempts and some pretty good carries this year specifically. And then it's just about getting your cap figured out, because you're walking in with about $13 million. They haven't signed their practice squad players yet. So when it's all said and done over the next 48 hours, they're going to be down basically at about 0 cap space against the $304 million projection. So you're going to have to do some work on Nico Collins and Derek Stingley Jr.'s contracts, and maybe Petre's as well. But outside of that, you're going to save cap space by extending players. That's the big crux of this offseason that I was able to put together. You're going to have to pay to gain space. And then you can go out and do some damage and, bolster your interior offensive line and all these things we're talking about. So it's not going to be uberly aggressive. They're not going to free up 60 million of cap room here. They're just not. So there's a world where they can get themselves comfortable. They can certainly afford their draft class and maybe one or two nice big, acquisitions, but don't be also surprised if there's a trade or two. This has been a heavy trade team. If that's the way they bring in positional changes, I wouldn't be overly surprised if that happens at any point in time over the offseason. So an active team, not an overly aggressive outside team, but look for tons of extensions that might feel like you're band-aiding a bunch of mistakes. In my opinion, you're just furthering the right part of your roster, the core part of your roster, because you have to live with a CJ Stroud situation for at least one more year, the full guarantee. And then going forward, we'll see what happens with that 5th-year option, which again projects to be around $40 million. So we will go from there and move on to our next team. I guess it's time. Let's stick in the AFC and load up the Bills offseason here, Dan, which was not going to be easy at all to start, right? Even if you took at surface face value what the Bills were going to have to deal with here, it was going to be a complicated offseason. And now you're going to add in the fact that they just moved on from head coach Sean McDermott, which means they're basically starting at ground zero from a roster standpoint from A to Z. Before I let you speak on that, I'll make note that not only did GM Brandon Beane remain, he was promoted to president of operations and football operations, which means he basically has carte blanche control now to hire this new head coach and maneuver the roster as he sees fit. Maybe there was a situation where McDermott had some say in that, obviously being there for nearly a decade. That probably won't be the case now for the next, 12 to 18 months. This is going to be Brandon Beane's team. And he's going to sink or swim with the next big draft, big offseason with 8 or 9 notable free agents, starters about to hit the open market here. And I don't think there's a GM in the league that has more pressure on his back right now than Brandon Beane does with his new position, his new role, and now having to find himself a new coach. Your thoughts on that part of the Bills offseason before we dive into some of the numbers here?
Mainly, it's just surprising that they weren't a package deal. I think a lot of us, at least locally, that was kind of the perception. And kind of this year, especially considering the wide receiver and the offensive situation as a whole down the stretch, I think Beane was more of, under the microscope than McDermott was. Like, everyone knows what Sean McDermott is. He's makes some questionable game management, timeout related decisions, but overall, I mean, like, for 9 years ago, if we were told what would happen over the last decade here, we would all have taken that compared to what how the Bills had performed for decades prior to that. So he was really the architect of changing the culture in Buffalo, but flawed as a head coach. Now, it's just interesting that they moved on from one and not the other, considering where this roster is and how the offensive environment down the stretch here with no wide receivers, lacking depth, throughout the roster, if you will. So that's a little bit surprising now. I guess I can leave it at that.
Okay. All right, let's get to this roster, which has been criticized for a while, really since the onset of 2025. To say they made the most of it is an understatement. They made the most out of the acquisition of Brandon Cooks at the deadline. They certainly battled through another injury-filled season, of Dalton Kincaid and a plethora of defensive players at Oliver, Terrell Bernard, the works, and still had a swing at it. Still had a legitimate, obviously, game-ending back-and-forth decision that would have walked them into the championship game, and probably a third swing at the New England Patriots for a Super Bowl appearance. So they're right there, and it's understandable that there had to be a fall guy for this. It is, you can't follow this league or any of these sports as long as we have, Dan, and not at least anticipate that change in some regard was going to happen. You certainly weren't going to change Josh Allen, okay? And there's plenty of other players that represent the core of this unit right now. You're walking into a new stadium in 2026, a huge investment from this ownership and certainly from the city itself and the county. I was pretty convinced that you were going to walk in with the entire unit. Both Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott were attached to the hip contractually, hired, extended the works together. It made sense for a lot of reasons that they should have been removed together. For that reason, they have been attached to the hip. There has been congruency. There has been consistency. It has been at least from the outside looking in, good back and forth. Are they both responsible for the deficiencies that exist in this roster right now? Can you blame the salary cap? Can you blame the inability to stagger certain things from a roster construction standpoint? Is that on both of their hands, or is it simply on the GM's hand? We don't know. We don't know the dynamic of how this all works. You're going to hear some things come out. There's some really good beat reporters who are going to follow this stuff closely and try to uncover some of this stuff. I'm surprised as you are that this wasn't a hand-in-hand move. But my only walk away from this, Dan, is that it's probably going to be 500% easier to replace a head coach than it is to replace a capable general manager who, while he has mistakes, okay, there's no question there's mistakes. All right. There's Von Miller. There's Amari Cooper. Every GM has those kind of mistakes. Some of them don't last through them. What does the promotion mean? It means I'm continuing to pay you, so you better do more work, right? Let's be honest about what that is. I'm paying now Sean McDermott to walk away on a 2-year guarantee through 2027. I'm not choosing to do that with my general manager too. So while you're here, here's 9 other things you have to do with your 9-to-5 job to account for this roster. Because if we're going to go down over the next 2 years, you're going to be the face of that. And that's what Brandon Beane now is. He is the face of the sink or swim that happens with the Buffalo Bills over the course of, I would say, the next 2 seasons. That's the expiration of his contract. So I'm surprised they're not attached to the hip. They used McDermott as a fall guy because this year did not go as planned. I do believe a lot of that is roster oriented and not coaching oriented and not even scheme oriented, really. And we'll see what happens over the course of the next 2 seasons as things get restructured heavily in what can only be described as a brand new culture, because that's what McDermott's main role was. Not a lot of teams do this, by the way. We've seen the Steelers now move on from Mike Tomlin, who set a 20-year culture for the Pittsburgh Steelers that was successful. Not Super Bowl successful, but successful. It does feel like McDermott was on that path, right? He was a leader of men that turned into so much positivity and so much success that it won ball games. It didn't win the biggest ball games, but the consistency and the reliability from McDermott's roster goes hand in hand. So at some point in time, you do have to rip the Band-Aid off and try to throw a wrench in that culture and win big. That's the risk the Bills are taking right now. And they're walking into, billions of dollars of new stadium to sort of show this team off. Josh Allen's going to be 30 years old the next time we see him. I guess I understand this being sort of the crunch point for that. What about this roster, Dan? I'm going to put this back on you because there are question marks, obviously. We just saw a depleted roster, an injured roster, and an underserved roster starting back in last March, where decisions were made on Josh Palmer and Curtis Samuel and a bunch of players like that certainly didn't hold up their end of the bargain for one reason or another. And now here we are. We've got 2 massive interior offensive linemen about to hit free agency in David Edwards, the left guard, and Connor McGovern, the center. We've got 2 edge rushers in Joey Bosa and AJ Epineza about to hit free agency. We've got an off-ball linebacker in Milano. We've got an off-ball linebacker in Shaq Thompson, who certainly played some of his best football in years, about to hit free agency. And then we've got bubble players in Tyler Bass, the kicker, who missed the whole year with an injury. What happens with safeties, Taylor Rapp, and maybe even Taron Johnson, who has been injured over the past 2 to 3 seasons. Certainly Samuel's going to fall off this roster, who's been basically a nothing from a receiver standpoint. And then we've got some more hot stubby stuff to get to, but negative cap space, not a lot of wiggle room in terms of salary conversions. You can free up maybe 25 to 30, Dan, with some of the restructure movements that are normal here, which means you're going to see players outright released or traded that probably shouldn't be, but are going to have to be because of the new culture that's about to come in? What makes you of this roster and some of these names and where we're headed over the course really of the next 8 weeks? It's going to be quick, right?
Yeah, honestly, I don't I don't know. I mean, I think there's going to be, like I said with Houston, a major attention to detail on the offensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing the cap situation, knowing Brandon Beane got retained, I would assume he laid out some sort of detailed plan
The
in terms of
manifesto.
yeah, if you will. I mean, like because we see new GMs come in and tend to take a half step back, reset the cap. You don't want to do that with Josh Allen in his prime. So I assume there was some plea of continuity there and laying out of a detailed plan of how they
Mm-hmm.
want to free up some money. And that's going to be, I mean, we saw this last year, sorry, 2 years ago now with like the Diggs release. And that was like an off season of real tough look in the mirror moves and
Sure.
how do we want to proceed going forward. I think this is going to be another one of those off seasons where, some legacy longtime Buffalo Bills might be coming off the roster for flexibility purposes rather than outright performance. But how they get better specifically, obviously they need wide receiver depth. But
Yeah.
beyond that, they can retool some of this and they're not that far away when you have probably the best quarterback on the planet right now, right?
No, that's unarguable. And you talk about everything he went through over the course of the last 6 weeks, and it is what it is. But look, we can kind of go name by name here. I'm not sure what you need to do that just yet, but a couple of quick ones for you. For instance, the list of free agents I just laid out for you. Are we at a point with Buffalo right now where you think the majority of those players just walk out the door? And by the way, now knowing that the head coach is out, right, and that there's going to be a basically start over from mini camp to training camp to how things are going to be run and everything. Is there a long shot now that the majority of these free agents come back to Buffalo?
I tend to say yes, but I guess we don't really know the inner workings between McDermott, Bean in the past. We have seen a lot of
Mm-hmm.
like either guys get extended or brought back after they leave the Bills, like retread players, if you will, a lot of continuity year to year. Now, whether that's a front office thing or more of like a coaching staff, I want these players that know our system, know our defense, etc. That's TBD, but kind of the way they release the McDermott news, reorganizing, promoting Bean, restructuring the front office to some degree. I wonder I wonder if there was some friction there based on like roster personnel decisions in the past, and if that might change going forward. So all
Yeah.
of that is to say, I think there will be some hard breaks with longtime Bills this offseason.
Okay. We'll take those with a grain of salt and we'll just kind of let it lay for a bit and see where it gets us. I think a lot will come from what the coaching hire is and what that looks like. This is a team that has 7 draft picks. They've been active, but sort of active at the back end of their draft in terms of trading. They do have their first round pick, which I think is going to be 26th, if I remember. 26th. Yeah. So, they are where they are. They know what they've been doing. It hasn't gone well with those late first round picks of late. It's been one of the bugaboos that's been attached to Brandon Beane now for the better part of half a decade here. So it's a big, big draft coming up here. We'll see if they move some of these core players that we've referenced here today, and maybe to bulk up some of those draft picks, because there is a need for a little bit of a financial reset in terms of what they can be healthy with. I can find pretty easily about 32 million of cap space with moving on from Curtis Samuel and Tyler Bass, converting some of Josh Allen and Spencer Brown's salary. That's the bulk of what's going to get them healthy for free agency. It's not going to open up enough to go make impact splashy moves. So, they may have to get creative with their draft pick allotment and some things like that. But we'll see. This is it's a new era, despite the fact that Beane remains, because you are seeing Josh Allen hit 30 years old. You are seeing some things kind of flip to a new level. And by the way, the firing of Sean McDermott, as heartbreaking as that may be for a lot of people locally, it is a shot to the skies. Okay, it is a flare shot to the skies that says that Terry Bigola has now said out loud that we are only in this for the Super Bowl. Okay, we are no longer in this to make the playoffs. We are no longer in this to, sneak into the second and third round of the postseason and bail out. Sean McDermott is fired right now because he is not in the Super Bowl in 3 weeks. And that is the end of the conversation. That is where it ends. So that is what the next 2 years are going to require for everybody involved. You know what I mean? And when that doesn't happen, there will be more firings and there will be more releases and more players will be traded. I expect that to start in the next couple of weeks. I expect that to start with some decisions that have to be made with free agency. I don't think there's a franchise tag in this team, so we can eliminate that part of the conversation. But I expect there to be some big decisions, and I think Josh Allen will be a big part of those decisions. For instance, the offensive linemen who are about to walk away. How important is Connor McGovern to Josh Allen right now? We obviously pretty important because it looked pretty bad when he had to leave the game for a minute and a half last week. But is he worth $16 million a year to this Bills organization and to Josh Allen specifically? So when you're reading the offseason piece, look at the numbers specifically, understand what can be opened up, and we'll have plenty more cracks at this one because I think this vaults Buffalo into maybe one of the top 2 or 3 teams to watch now heading into that March 11th free agency. So we'll get there when we got to get there, but plenty to talk about early on here. Let's flip to the NFC, Dan. One of the more heartbreaking postseasons, let alone, I mean, total NFL collapse here, but Caleb Williams has maybe the greatest play in Bears postseason history, finding Cole Kmet in the back of the end zone, and then they not meltdown, but certainly have their shortcomings in the overtime and lose to the Rams, who move on to the NFC Championship game against Seattle. This Bears team overachieved. They outkicked their coverage. Caleb Williams took massive steps forward in year 2, something we don't see very often. But how much of that do you attribute to Ben Johnson, and how much do you think other teams are now looking at the Vrabel situation, the Ben Johnson situation, and a few others, right? Canales in Carolina and St. Liam Cohen in Jacksonville. How much are other teams looking at those 4 teams and saying, maybe that's all it takes is another set of eyes, another scheme, and our quarterback right now, who is, essentially letting us down, can turn things around that quickly with the right system in place?
I assume everybody is. I mean,
Yeah.
we know it's
glaringly obvious, right, Dan?
Yeah, and it's a copycat league. So, and to kind of just lean back on the Bills point, it all depends on the coaching hire because, like, I personally thought that the Bears situation wouldn't work out in terms of retaining Ryan Poles. I thought he had made a bunch of questionable
that's
moves.
interesting. That's a nice parallel. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, not that Josh Allen needs to be developed. It's not his second year. He needs to be, developed, so to speak. But I do think there is some inherent value in these offensive head coaches that you just feel like can scheme and game plan, like from a clock management standpoint too. Like,
Right.
you
It's
see
all
them just
happening
like,
simultaneously, right?
yes, you see them have a better, clearer view of what they're ultimately trying to go with when you have a quarterback of Josh Allen's caliber. So, yeah, I think all of these teams are probably, I mean, that's not a new aspect, but all of these teams are going to be searching for in my opinion, the next, up and coming offensive guru, if you will.
Okay. The Bears have a pretty good outlook here. It's not sink or swim. They walk in with $5 million of cap space. That's a number. Okay, that's just a number. They're going to sign some reserve players that dropped them into the negatives, and the city of Chicago is going to freak out because they're a massive sports team with a huge following. I can tell you right now, if you scroll down to the bottom of my article on this team, even without the bubble players, who I think are very, very fringy bubble players, I've got Cole Kmet, the tight end who just caught that massive pass, and Tremaine Edmonds, the center of the Bears defense. Those are 2 starters, and I realize Colston Loveland's an up-and-coming player. He's going to be the TE1 for quite a while there. It seems like there's no need to move on from those players outside of the fact that you can free up some cap space. Maybe they're tradable, and you can get yourself a couple extra draft picks, which I think will help the overall core process a little bit better. But at the end of the day, neither of these players need to be moved on from. They are high cap hits that have the ability to be moved on from because of their positions and because maybe their replacement already exists on the roster. So moving away from that, DJ Moore's sticking around for another year. He's fully guaranteed. Just a simple conversion on him, it frees up almost $18 million. The same for Joe Thuney, who frees up almost 12. And then there's 2 or 3 other players that can get you double-digit cap savings with just a simple salary conversion. And I say all that, Dan, to say this. You mentioned the GM situation that has been stable now for a bit. They have not used void years. They have not tacked on restructured situations. They have tried to play this by the book, the old Green Bay Packers style. They've tried to be good Samaritans with their salary cap. They don't want dead cap. They don't want void cap. They don't want to have, push it down the line kind of situations. They're going to have to graduate to big boy land this year if they want to stick. Okay. That is the way that they have to free up cap space, because they're not going to be trading left and right. Maybe there's a move that we don't see coming yet, but even to retain some defensive players that I think look good. Jaquan Brisker, the safety, Kevin Byard had a great year for them. Those are two big pieces about to walk away to free agency. And there are a couple of weapons to move, to add to this system a little bit, despite the fact that I think they have two nice running backs, two up and coming wide receivers to go around more. They've hit some draft picks nicely in that regard. And they have started to figure out that O-line, because they basically just acquired everybody else's players over the course of the last 18 months. So they did a lot of things right in 2025. Let's give them full credits. But I will say they're going to have to change their structure. They're going to have to change their mindset and graduate to big boy land. And unfortunately, that's going to have to come with the use of void years with some of these contracts, because it's just the going rate. It's just how things are going to have to work to free up the amount of cap space they're going to need to stay competitive, to improve in certain positions, and to go from there. Now, look, they could go the other way. They could go the Philadelphia Eagles route, and there's some connections there. There's some connective tissue there. And they could just extend most of these players versus a simple conversion with void years and throw some fake stuff at the end of it. They could just add on real years to some of these players that don't necessarily need it. And that's how they free up cap space. So just watch out for a lot of activity that seems somewhat suspect from a Bears team that is going to feel like they have to go all in right now. And I think for a lot of reasons that's warranted, because Caleb Williams does look the part, Dan, right?
Oh, for sure.
Has anybody taken a bigger step forward? Trevor Lawrence had a great year. He resuscitated his whole career in one 2025 regular season. I don't think he did what Caleb Williams did in 1 year, which is go from basically almost 1 year bust to a top 10 quarterback in the league. That's what he is right now. He's a top 10 quarterback now, heading into 2026.
Well, yeah, and he was it's less that he in my opinion, it's less that he developed up and more that he just got, hit his potential. Like last year, he underwhelmed. And I think a lot of that was circumstantial rather than, the narrative that he might just be a bad quarterback. I think that was always out of play. And, bringing in Ben Johnson, obviously, we've seen the effects of that. So.
All right. Yeah. The sky is not falling. They're not in cap hell. There's room to move. They're just going to have to decide that making the proper movement and switching some trends that they've had in the past, they're going to have to change to like I said, graduate to that next level. All right. Finally, man, did the 49ers get their ass kicked in. But look, sometimes you just read the names on paper and you realize they're just not in the same league anymore. And that's what that 49ers team was. They got to a point where the injuries piled up so much that it was varsity versus JV, unfortunately, especially when talking about that Seattle defense. How much stock do you put in what we saw over the past couple of weeks with San Francisco, positively and negatively, and certainly with some of the injuries that are carrying over with Tondres and Kittle and a few others, the Ayuk situation, of course. What's your outlook for this 2026 team? I've heard a couple people this morning specifically say that the window is now officially shut on this current iteration of the 49ers, that there's going to have to be so much change that it's going to feel more like a restart than it is kind of a carryover and an improvement situation. I'm not sure I'm there, but I guess I do understand that, right? You're not moving on from Bosa yet, or certainly Purdy yet, but there's a whole wide receiver arsenal to redo here. McCaffrey's probably walking into his final year, if I had to guess, in 2026, at least in the current iteration. Maybe he latches on 1-year deals either here or elsewhere. But I guess I do understand the idea that there's enough change and enough injury and the cap situation, et cetera, where you could feel like Seattle and the Rams and, a couple other NFC teams, the Bears specifically, are light years ahead of where this team probably is going to be in 2026.
Agreed. They're going to have to do a similar reset as the Bills, if you will. They're still
Yeah.
obviously in
Yeah.
contention, but there's a lot of things that need to be done going forward, right? But I mean, it's Kyle Shanahan. You have a quarterback, you have a running back. I get he's like an aging running back, becoming less efficient, but you still
Yeah.
have pieces there. The Juwan Jennings thing needs to be addressed and what they do at receiver going forward. There are
Yeah.
question marks, but I understand some hesitancy around what they have going forward. But I mean, ultimately, we've seen this front office make strategic moves, and I assume they'll be right back in it next year. You know, like the injury attrition was not just at the end; it was an issue all throughout the year.
Yeah.
And right up until during the game when you're losing Jake Tongas, who was replacing
Yeah.
George Kittle. Christian McCaffrey went down for a little while, so you were just losing guys left and right there. Too much to overcome at that point. So I have no doubt they'll do what's needed and be a contender again next year. Probably not a favorite. I wouldn't throw them in that bucket, but some sort of reset to get them back in.
Yeah, I like the Bills connection, with the obvious difference that Kyle Shanahan is going nowhere. He's a wizard,
Right.
and he damn near pulled out his biggest magic trick yet to date in 2025. The fact that they were here in this game with Seattle in the first place is all credits to him. And by the way, a lot of credit to Brock Purdy, who, man, he shut up a lot of doubters in 2025. When he came back, Mac Jones played well, but we realized that Mac Jones was playing well because of scheme, system, and some of the offensive players around him, regardless McCaffrey at times. But Mac Jones is a very capable quarterback in this league, maybe not just for 17 weeks. That's all. But when Brock Purdy came back into the fold, it was a night and day situation. I mean, he is a game changer without really having too much of the tools that can elevate a team on his own. You know what I mean? Like, he is just so heady, so intelligent, and is accurate enough to overcome his own deficiencies to the point of where he's going to be a winning quarterback for a long time, especially in this system. I do have one name to mention here, though. Trent Williams is 38. He will be 38 when the 2026 season begins. He's entering a contract year. He's carrying a $39 million cap hit, and he's owed $33 million cash in 2026. So, of course, he's already announced he's going to return next year because guess what? That's not normal 38-year-old money. What do we do with that? Because at some point in time, you have to replace Trent Williams. Now, it hasn't gone well ever in his career. Not anywhere, okay? But at some point in time, you've got to find his heir apparent. I assume they do something from free agency or the draft, or maybe both, to attempt to do that. But at the same point in time, you're not going to say no to Trent Williams, right? I mean, you're going to keep him around. Are you going to convert that salary and keep him on $33 million? Are you going to convert this into a 2-year contract? What do you do with a player like this who is direly important and yet has absolutely no future with your team?
Honestly, I would defer to you because I mean, you laid out my perspective. He's a massively critical piece to that.
But also,
I mean,
he will hold out. He will skip
right.
games. He has shown all of this. So it's not just that they need him, but they probably don't want to pay him much. He will hold out if it's not exactly what he wants. So do you just, I guess it goes back to our initial thought, which is, where are the 49ers in 2026?
Right.
Okay. Because if they are anticipating a step back, then I don't think you pay Trent Williams. I think that is one of the things you bite off in 2026 and say, okay, this guy has done right by us for forever, but we cannot acquiesce to $30 million right now for this player, all things considered. And knowing he's going to fight like hell to get that money from us, which he's perfectly within reason to do, we're just going to give up on the player. And maybe they can trade him for something. Maybe he forces their hand and they have to release him. But that's a big what if heading towards March 11th for me, because they don't have his left tackle behind him on the roster right now. They just don't. And I don't think they're flipping right to left in that regard either. So it may be priority number one, especially because Brock Purdy's under contract here. Let's just say that's the scenario, because I like kind of playing out this version of the 49ers right now heading into March. Let's say that's the case, that they decide that they're in a tier that doesn't acquiesce to paying Trent Williams what he wants in 2026. Do you then go one step further, Dan, and say the same thing about McCaffrey? because you're essentially walking into the same situation with Christian McCaffrey. And I realize that's a sexier name for a lot of people, especially fantasy owners out there. But why would you keep one and not the other? You know what I mean? Why would you not make the same decision with both of those players if you believe that you're a rung below where you want to be?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't know what they do or how that'll play out, but I think that all makes sense. What would
Yeah.
I do? I mean, I'm trying to keep it together one more year. You're in a window. You have the coach. You have the quarterback. You have pieces. I understand the long term ramifications, but it's a now. It's all about the now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I get it. And most teams do feel that way. And I agree with it. I agree with building for today, not tomorrow. I just think at some point in time, every organization has to look around and say, okay, but the today is not going to be good enough. You know what I mean? We're not going to compete with what the division has to offer, maybe what the conference has to offer on a whole level. And in order to do that, it's going to cost us heaven and hell over the course of the next few months to get there. And we're going to be no better for ourselves in 2027, by the way. You know what I mean? Like, it's a band-aid approach to try to throw a Hail Mary into the end zone for one season. And by the way, the 49ers have done this. They have done the all-in approach multiple times over the past 4 to 5 years and just haven't gotten to the finish line with it. I do like the Bills comparison quite a bit here. It does feel like those two teams are somewhat attached at the hip here, despite the fact that, some of the roster decisions are going to be a little bit different positionally. I don't think it's a hot take to say that McCaffrey could be on the block right now. I don't think that's a hot take. And I don't think it's the wrong move by San Francisco either, because it doesn't make sense to do justice to him as he finishes out the best couple of years of his career in a rebuild situation, in a retool situation where most of those weapons and maybe some of those offensive linemen are going to be young and may need a minute to catch up, right? Purcell hasn't got there yet. They don't have a WR1 in this roster. And I don't think they're going to have one at the end of March. You know what I mean? Like, they moved on from Samuel. They're going to move on from Ayuk, obviously. I don't think they retain Jennings, Dan. I think there's a free agency team that overpays for Jennings that prices himself out of San Francisco. So I think it's a lot of retread that they're considering. And at the end of the day, that might just be too expensive. So the names that are out there, maybe you attack this from a defensive side of the ball. You keep a couple players in tow. You add some pieces to the secondary that I think has been deficient for a bit here. And you start to attack that thing backwards, maybe like Houston. And you start to draft heavily offensively on the line with the weapons, because you do have a bit of a ramp up period with Purdy. Purdy's going nowhere. I think he made that pretty evident over the past 18 months. He's going nowhere. The contract certainly says that, but so does his play and his consistency. So, yeah, I like that. I like that the Bills and 49ers are kind of looking at themselves the same way in 2026 here. And that might mean a name or two that we're not expecting gets thrown on the trade block at the end of the day, which could be fun in March.
Agreed.
Man, it's a busy time of year. By the way, you can do all this work that we're talking about on Spot Track by managing a roster, by proposing a trade. We've got some pretty fun tools out there that do all the math for you in the back. So if you want to go out there and kind of hack and whack on your current roster and make some salary conversions, some trades, some free agent signings, I believe you can actually even draft some players on there now. We've got some prospects in the pool where you can go and select for the Bills, number 26 overall, and it'll show you the current cap hit based on our contract projections for all the rookies and things like that. So pretty in-depth stuff that our developer, Scott Allen, has been building behind the scenes for us. More of that to come, of course, in all of the sports, and more of this to come, because we're down to the Final Four heading into next weekend. It's time, Dan. I don't think I've asked you this since August. Your Super Bowl picks. Are you taking Jarrett Stidham to the Super Bowl, Dan?
I mean, probably not, although I will be on the other side of the narrative that the Broncos are totally out of it.
First thing I thought of when I saw the news, Dan is going to bet the hell out of Denver right now.
Well, I don't even know that. I know for the next 6 days, the narrative is going to be,
of course,
it's New England in the Super Bowl. And I do believe in Sean Payton, plus that defense, home field advantage, et cetera, that, Drake May, young quarterback who has struggled under pressure. We saw what happened against Houston. Broncos have a similar defensive, type of defense. caliber of defense. So I think I'm leaving the light on for a Jared Stidham, surprise. I don't know if you saw the Nick Foles.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Tweet.
Nick
So
Foles
good.
is a legend. Yeah, please
So
find
good.
that tweet and read it and enjoy life with it, because he at first I thought it was a job interview. At first I thought he was putting himself out there to be signed last minute. And then when I read what he was saying, it was a beautiful thing. So yes.
Yeah.
It's not a walkover game. It's not. Neither of these games are walkover games, even though both New England and Seattle look at the prime of their powers right now. That's obviously what the odds makers are telling us is going to happen. And it'd be a great Super Bowl. It'd be a great rematch after all those years, coach-wise, defensive-wise, and certainly from a quarterback standpoint as well. You believe in Sam Darnold enough, Dan?
That's the thing.
By the way, where the hell was the oblique injury? He looked phenomenal.
Well, Kyle Shanahan made a lot of Toradol references in his post-game presser, so I have a feeling it had a lot to do with that. But they just simply didn't need him to really dominate the game, right? It was over from the start. Now, I think it's going to be a little bit different. I would say the Seattle defense is like the key to me. If they can pressure Matt Stafford and get Sean McVay out of his play calling rhythm, which pretty much happened last night.
It did. The Bears did a great job. Yeah,
I think the Seahawks definitely have the leg up, but from it's really hard. It's really hard to go against the Rams, but I think Seahawks top to bottom are probably the better roster. I'm gonna lean that way with the home field advantage.
All right, I'll get you out here on this then. Sam Darnold is in the NFC Championship game right now. He's the favorite to not only go to, but win the Super Bowl right now. Okay, as the starting quarterback. Is there a world where he comes back for $27.5 million cash next season, or are we talking about a new contract for Sam Darnold already?
If he wins the Super Bowl, I mean,
let's say right now, he's a semifinalist right now.
It's all going to depend on if it looks bad. Like, the hesitancy has been because of poor playoff performances and recent
under pressure.
If he lays an egg,
isn't that crazy? Right?
Yeah.
We thought that it was crazy that it would happen last year after the Minnesota debacle, and then it did. It torpedoed his market. He got a 1-year contract essentially.
The game before, they were hoisting him on their shoulders in the locker room. The narrative was, look at this guy, they love him.
All about the final taste in our mouth. Yes,
absolutely.
So I don't think you're wrong. He could throw up an absolute dud against the Rams, and there's not even a sniff about his contract. Right? Not even a sniff. In fact, you'll have people saying, we can get out of this thing before February 13th. Should we consider it? You'll have that. And that won't be me, but you'll have that. I think right now there's a better chance he is extended than anything else, because I do think he has persevered through all the BS. He is now a winning quarterback. Okay. He has surpassed, by the way, Baker Mayfield and his resurrection period, right? This is Sam Darnold's window now. Okay. He is the breadwinner of this. Go all the way down to the bottom as a former lottery pick, and then resurrect yourself all the way back to the top. He's there now, okay? And he's expected to make the Super Bowl in the course of the next 6 or 7 days. And when that happens, he's going to have to be talked about as a $50 million quarterback. There's no other way around this, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Like, in the way the Seahawks are constructed, I mean, we'll see what happens with Clint Kubiak if he gets a head coaching job, but that team doesn't want him to drop back 35, 40 times a game, right? Where Minnesota was a little bit more built through the air. The Seahawks want to run the ball 35, 40 times a game if they can, and let Darnold, hit JSN eight times for Absolutely. 2 touchdowns and let that be the game, right? So I think if there's continuity next year, or they want to run a similar style offense, like, he's the perfect fit for them. So why I don't see why there would be hesitancy.
And by the way, all of that gets factored into the negotiation room, right? You're never going to be a top flight quarterback in this league, because we're not going to let you be, right? We're going to build a roster and and we have a scheme in mind that is much more balanced than that. So we're never going to have numbers that stand out together collectively. So he's a 50, not a 60. That's all I'm saying. He's a 50, not a 60. Baker Mayfield, the same conversation for me. And if he had a little better, a less injured year, we'd be having that same conversation. And I think, by the way, a new OC and some fun things that happen in Tampa Bay, we can be having this conversation again next winter. But Sam Darnold is in a spot where he is flourishing and is never going to be asked to do more than his contract and his abilities and his personality, I think, will ever need him to do, right? So it's a pot sweetener extension. Okay. We're at 27 and change right now, cash. We can double that for 1 year with a big signing bonus, and we can go 50 to 52 million. We can give him the Brock Purdy contract, right? And that's no problem. We can make him Brock Purdy in this division and make them a 1-2 punch for the next couple of seasons without any kind of problems. I can tell you right now, the Seahawks don't guarantee future salaries. So the guarantees aren't going to stick out like a sore thumb. It's going to be a year-to-year rolling contract, but you got to get it cash appropriate already, in my opinion. He has already superseded his Minnesota debacle, which was a 2-week debacle with 18 weeks of top flight quarterback play. So I'm there with him. So I'm already walking away thinking he's done enough. But you're right. If it's a mess next Sunday, a lot of people are going to be pushing back in this conversation. A lot.
Right. For the record, I don't think it will. I mean, they just need him to manage the game, limit turnovers.
Right.
You know, he's the polar opposite of Geno Smith. They saw Geno Smith 1 year and were like, this is not the guy for the offense we want to run. And they brought in Sam Darnold, and it's worked to a T. So I think they're going to stick with that game plan. I guess why I'm confident in that is the Seattle defense is so good that I don't see the Rams running away with it to a point where you have to force Sam Darnold into 40, 45 dropbacks, anything like that. So that's where that's where I land ultimately.
And by the way, some of these teams we're talking about today, Houston specifically with that running game, Kenneth Walker Jr. or Kenneth Walker likely to hit the open market because of Zach Charbonnet and some other things institutionally. That's a big name. That guy's right at the top of the list with your Breece Halls and your Javonte Williams and the rest of the names we'll get to in a while here. But he's at the top of this list. He's been healthy and an absolute powerhouse for Seattle. So look for that one to be, attached to a couple of these big teams, these big contending teams heading towards 2026. All right, man. We're going to have to touch base on baseball soon because my Mets actually did something positive. We'll talk about the impact of that and a couple more things coming down the pipeline, maybe a Bellinger contract in the next couple of hours here. And maybe we'll put some of the pieces of the puzzle back together here as well. So good stuff from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. All right. Check out these articles live on SpyTrade.com right now. Again, I've got 28 of the 32 NFL teams previewed for 2026 with full financials and thoughts and bubbles and extensions and all that fun stuff. And check out all these fun tools Scott Allen's been building. Manage your roster, propose some trades, have some fun with the upcoming draft. All available right now on SpyTrade.com. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the SpyTrade Podcast.